First Corinthians, the author of First Corinthians is identified in First Corinthians 1:1, and it's none other than the Apostle Paul. First Corinthians 1:1, this letter is from Paul, chosen by the will of God to be an apostle of Christ Jesus, and from our brother Sosthenes. Date of the writing, the book of First Corinthians was written in approximately AD 55, or roughly 25 years after the resurrection. Purpose of the writing, the Apostle Paul founded the church in Corinth. A few years after leaving the church, the Apostle Paul heard some disturbing reports about the Corinthian church. They were full of pride and were excusing sexual immorality. Spiritual gifts were being used improperly, and there was rampant misunderstanding of key Christian doctrines. The Apostle Paul wrote this first letter to the Corinthians to restore the Corinthian church to its foundation, Jesus Christ. The outline for 1 Corinthians introduction is in chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, responding to the reports Paul had heard. That takes up 5 chapters, chapter 110 to 620. Then we read responses to Paul's letter in chapter 7 through chapter 16, and finally the conclusion at the end of chapter 16. 1 Corinthians 3:12, anyone who builds on that foundation, the foundation was Jesus, may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, the builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss. The builder will be saved, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. From the text, we see there will be a judgment of our works, not to see if we get into heaven, but to test the quality of our service to Christ after salvation. There are rewards for works done for Him, and loss of rewards for works that were done for purposes other than elevating Jesus. The criterion for this judgment is, what did you do with what you were given? The above is the text to go to for the Bema, also known as the judgment seat of Christ. That's where an evaluation of a believer's works takes place. What did you do with what you were given? That's the big question. I want the above to reverberate through our minds maybe 1,000 times each day. We will not be accountable for things we didn't have or things that were beyond our capacity to achieve. We will be accountable for our time, talent, and treasure, and how we managed all 3 of them. The Bema is limited to an evaluation of the believer's works after salvation. The phrase, anyone who builds on that foundation, makes the time post-salvation. 2 Corinthians 1:1 identifies the author of the book, again as the Apostle Paul, and possibly along with Timothy. 2 Corinthians 1:1, this letter is from Paul, chosen by the will of God to be an apostle of Christ Jesus, and from our brother. Date of the writing, the book of 2 Corinthians was written likely between AD 55 and 57, 25 to 27 years or so after the resurrection. Purpose of the writing, in his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul expresses his relief and joy that the Corinthians had received his severe letter in a positive manner. The letter addresses issues that were tearing the church apart, primarily the arrival of self-styled false apostles. We find that in 2 Corinthians 11:13, who were assaulting Paul's character, sowing discord among the believers, and teaching false doctrine. They appear to have questioned his veracity, 2 Corinthians 1:15 to 17, his speaking ability, 2 Corinthians 10:10 and 11:6, and his unwillingness to accept support from the church at Corinth. That's in 2 Corinthians 11:7 to 9, and chapter 12, verse 13. There were also some people who had not repented of their licentious behavior. The outline for 2 Corinthians, blessing God for comforting the apostle, reconciliation between Paul and the Corinthians, Paul's ministry, he was an ambassador for a new covenant, holiness as separation from the world, appeals for the Jerusalem collection, And then the last one, against the super apostles. 2 Corinthians 12:7. Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Just as we learned about the suffering of Job in the Old Testament, so here we see that sometimes even the best of our brethren are called to suffer. Paul goes so far as to say, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, as though it were a gift of sorts. And it was a gift because he was more effective for Christ with it than he ever was without it. So the apostle who had been used hundreds of times by God to work healing for others now hears, No, Paul, I have a different path for you. While others have been healed, you must be content with your pain, and in fact, you should glory in it. Paul himself declares, For when I am weak, then I am strong, meaning I am better off with this thorn than I would ever be without it. Points to ponder. Paul wrote his first letter to the Corinthians to restore the Corinthian church to its foundation, Jesus Christ. We will not be accountable for things we didn't have or for things that were beyond our capacity to achieve. We will be accountable for our time, talent, and treasure, and how we managed all 3 of them. This class, and indeed the entire school, is dedicated to helping others see that God is bigger than we think and better than we know. To get to the next video, make a note of the class number for this recording. Then search for the next one. Here's a sample. If this video is number L01.1, then the next one is L01.2. And remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow on Rumble.